Hi there and welcome back. My name is Sheldon McLeod. This is Thinking Out Loud. It's presented to you here exclusively on the Saltwire Network. And you'd be forgiven if you don't follow standing committees on health at the Nova Scotia Legislature. Life gets busy, and a 2-hour meeting was held this week to talk about gender affirming care. And why is this important? Well, if we go back to the census from earlier this year, and this commentary was at saltwire.com, trans and non-binary people are being counted. There was a specific question or series of questions on the census that points to a number, a transgender and non-binary community visibility, as it's been described, that 0.33%, 1 in 300 in this country identify as non-binary or as trans. And the Public Accounts Committee had witnesses yesterday, and I want to play a quick snippet of part of that testimony. This is part of the opening from yesterday.
Lead or follow is the question that we are dealing with today in distilling the conversations about gender affirming care. We are the most trans province per capita in Canada and the second most trans city in Canada. The reality is the changes that we're going to talk about today are going to come no matter what. We should be leading as the most trans province in these issues, and there is no reason that we're being outpaced by other provinces that have a much smaller percentage of their population identifying as members of our community. We must reflect that this system of gender affirming care in Nova Scotia was never designed to work. From the beginning, it was never designed to fully address what we need here in this province. And we've had 10 years, more than 10 years, to address these problems and make changes. And we have only seen 3 major changes in the last decade. We know the benefit of making these changes. We know the consequences of not making them. We have run out of time to address these issues. We've waited 10 years, and in that time, people have died. People have suffered unnecessarily. People have gone into life-crushing debt unnecessarily. If we want to do what's best for our communities and what is best for our province, we need to do more, and we need to work faster than what we currently are on gender affirming care.
That's Riley Nelson-Baker, Director of Gender Affirming Care in Nova Scotia. And joining me to talk about this is Mikaela Gorman, and it's a real pleasure to speak with you about gender affirming care. What does gender affirming care mean to you and to community?
So that can really mean a lot of things. For me, I am and speaking only for myself, I'm a pre-op trans femme woman. So I have not gone through, quote unquote, the surgery that many people would be thinking, oh, that's the primary thing that you're in the care for. But it is leading up to it. So it could be as simple as that surgery. So bottom surgery is usually what it's called. It could also be aspects of top surgery for trans femme, trans masculine, non-binary people. But it's not just the surgery. It can also be access to prescription medication that will help you throughout the process. Not everyone takes the medication, the hormone therapy, but for those who do, you have to do it for years in advance of a surgery and then years and years after. So you need access to that steady supply and financial support for it. Otherwise, it can be up to $150 a month on top of everything else. You need doctors who understand what is going on. It's not enough simply to have a family doctor in Nova Scotia, which is hard enough to come across. You need to have a family doctor who first understands what you're going through as a medical procedure and then is supportive of it. Some of them may be supportive, but have no idea what resources to draw upon, who to connect you to, or any of that. And then after all of that, you need the mental health support of it, because this is an incredibly stressful and trying thing to go through and is very stressful leading up to it. The realization and comfort that you have to have with yourself to even accept it, and then look at your surroundings, your resources, your networks, and say, can I do this without it becoming worse for me? There needs to be, at the very least, supports in place on a mental health level from the province, along with access to hormones, along with access to surgeries itself. And all of these in Nova Scotia have separate issues.
For people that may hear the terminology gender dysphoria, what exactly does that mean? Or is it even easy to say exactly what it means?
It actually is. And so I'm in a unique position to explain it to some people. I lost, completely unrelated to my gender transition, about 80 pounds. I went from being rather overweight to rather athletic, and completely separate from my gender issues, how I view myself there. I have leftover ones from being large. It's small things like you don't consider yourself in one way. You feel unhealthy. You feel depressed based on body image, based on how that body image is then reflected by other people and how they interact with you. It can be something as small as if you look at a doorway and something in your mind goes, you're too fat for that. And it's like that, that's part of how other people might understand it. When it comes to gender dysphoria and dysmorphia, it's in smaller things that in our society we don't even think about. It's an old cliche of chivalry, but holding open a door for someone who is, say, trans femme is what we call gender euphoric concepts. When the gender and sexuality and sex that you identify in is accepted and supported through social norms, such as holding a door open for a lady kind of thing, that's called gender euphoria. And it's the exact opposite of gender dysphoria and dysmorphia. Dysmorphia is body. Dysphoria is when your surroundings, your society itself just do not support you or do not show those little aspects where it's no, on the foreground, or on the forefront, we support you and we're 100% behind you, but we're not changing any aspect about society to actually include you.
When we're talking about the province of Nova Scotia, the premier having meetings, talking about healthcare and fixing healthcare, and this was a big part of this public health committee, the standing committee, the conversation about educating doctors, educating people within medical community, but also about the public. And I'm wondering how we have this conversation if, in fact, as we heard from the speaker in that clip, that we are, as a proportion, the proportion of people who identify as non-binary or trans is higher in Halifax than it is in almost any city in Canada, the province itself. I'm just wondering how you feel about this conversation and perhaps the lack of a public discourse about this in some ways outside of the trans community.
It's for sure one of those confusing things for a lot of people outside the trans community, because it seemed to have come on rather sudden in the last 10 years, and now it's a very important issue. It's one of those things where you don't see how it might affect you if you're not trans or non-binary, but it's all about access to healthcare and access to human rights in a real positive way. So one example I can think of, I'm not going to name them for their own privacy, but we have in this province, on paper, access to breast enhancement and reduction, depending on how you need the service. So a non-binary person can have breast reduction if they do not feel that the breasts are a part of their identity or represent how they want to be seen in society. On the other hand, there's always people who would say if I'm a cisgender woman and I want breast enhancement, does that mean that the province will pay for it? And it's well, it depends on your perspective. So on paper, you have access to these things. But in the example of my friend, she then had to actually explain to the offices and to the people who pay for it through MSI what to do to actually process this claim through. And it's not just about making sure that trans people like she can access that. She's laying the groundwork so that a cisgender woman can also get the enhancement they need if they have been found to require it by like mental processes and like a mental health process. And that mental health process can't exist if you don't have doctors in the province and specialists who can meet you, who have access to the necessary resources to then point you in the right direction, who understand things. There are as many as 5,000 trans people in Nova Scotia and maybe 5 to 6 doctors who can talk about it. So on paper, we've got options. In reality, none of this is really progressing without someone pushing it hard. And it's just another aspect of the health problem, the healthcare crisis in Nova Scotia and the Maritimes, and it will impact you in ways that you don't expect, even if you're cisgender.
We have a progressive conservative government. Do you see changes? Have things changed in the way that the medical community has responded to you throughout your life experience over the last few years?
There have been changes, but they have not been coming from the progressive conservative government. There's been, so one of the speakers in that clip is from Gender Affirming Care, Nova Scotia. And they have, along with some doctors, put forward various policy initiatives and approaches how to solve these problems. So people are working the problem, but it's not the government who's working the problem. They're being approached with solutions for the problem. And they're not exactly acting quickly on it at all. It's understandable. It's not like trans people and the queer community typically votes conservative, so there's not much draw to really serve that community. But promises have been made in previous governments which mean that the province is now on the hook to deliver some aspects of support that, as I said, on paper, it's there. But when you get into the fine details, the bureaucracy of it, it's not really thought out. And I'm not entirely sure if having a different government would actually change that, because that's just getting into bureaucracy, and no government wants to spend money or deal time on that.
How comfortable are you with this conversation when people talk top surgery, bottom surgery, when people who know that you are identifying as a trans woman, that they may have questions, but yet they don't have anyone in their lives that might have, give them an opportunity to ask those questions? I mean, you've been very outspoken on social media. That's partially why I felt comfortable, bringing this topic to you and asking if this is something you want to speak with. So how does your family and friends, how do they react to, your conversation and the fact that you are somewhat outspoken?
They react positively, but I am very outspoken about everything. My mouth rarely shuts. And I am very lucky, and I need to be very clear about this. I'm incredibly lucky that in my life, no one has had a positive reaction. Everyone's been interested, curious. If they have asked questions that have perhaps been offensive in a way, I know that it's not coming from anything more than like, I don't even know how to ask a question about this, let alone what your answer would be. A lot of people face a lot of negativity and a lack of support, even from their friends and family, to the point that they're pretty much cut off, and the only family, friends, support network whatsoever is other trans people online. So it's important in my mind to be very vocal and visible, so that others are not afraid, and maybe through the connections or the information I share, they can find others. But it's about making cis people understand as well just how important it is to be there for people. And it is okay to ask questions. Just know who you can ask questions of. You can ask me any questions, but someone who is just out, it's exhausting. It is completely exhausting. I had a complete breakdown when I came out. Everything in my life collapsed. And the last thing you want at that moment necessarily is for someone to start asking you 1,000 questions, some of which are very invasive. So it's a conversation that has to happen, but because of how traumatic it can be, sometimes it's not one that can be had. So that's why I and others try to be so outspoken about it and try to make sure that everyone on all sides of this understand their intellectual responsibilities.
You touched on the mental health and mental wellness aspect of it. Is there, and I hear from people who struggle with everything from suicide ideation to having challenges with depression. There are a lot of things, and I'm not even talking about the trans community, just in our population in general, and the people that sometimes reach out to the media because they feel that the system is not working for them or sometimes working against them. Do we have any opportunity here to give credit to the province who says they want to do more to offer mental health and mental wellness care in this province, and specific to the trans community?
Well, it's certainly better than it has been. There are one of the weirder things about being trans in Nova Scotia is this is in many aspects the best it is in terms of relative to other places. There are parts of the states where your state government, your local representative government are aggressively fighting against you. And there's no aggressively fighting against us, even from this conservative government here. There's simply the same lack of action and traction and perhaps interest in an answer that is not privately driven that they bring to other things. Like when we talk about mental health and transgender people and communities, a lot of the time, the mental health issues are not driven by being trans. Like it definitely messes with your head and completely screws up your perspective on like society and interactions and all of that. But it can exacerbate other issues. So even if we had a 100% supportive trans government and a bureaucracy that showed that and represented it, you would still have those mental health issues because it's entire aspects of the mental health support system that has to be approached. Like a lot of people's economic anxiety does not disappear just because they came out. They have better tools for dealing with it now. And that's a big part of it, is like allowing people to transition and be supported makes them more productive. It makes them more supportive of others in society, and it strengthens us all. But if that person still has an underlying issue connected to something else, it doesn't just go away. So we have to, on a large scale, bring in massive support and reform and change, because it's not just this. This is kind of like it's a spectrum.
There's so many more conversations we should have, but we'll leave it at that. Obviously, this issue came up as part of the legislative process, and I thought it was important to talk about it at Saltwire. And as one of my coworkers, I thought that, yes, she is the one to talk to me about this if Mikaela is up for it. And I'm glad you said yes. So thank you, Mikaela, for sharing your perspective today.
Thank you so much for